It's the million-dollar question. Do we have the opportunity today to win? That's why you're here, isn't it? You want to win. So win what? Well, we need to return to the time where independent, family-owned and operated cattle farms and ranches all across America, hundreds of thousands of them, had the opportunity to be profitable in their industry, the opportunity to support their rural communities, and the opportunity to do all of that by making their own production decisions and their own marketing decisions and selling livestock in a competitive marketplace. That's what it means to win. So back to the question. Do you have the opportunity today to win? We don't have to go back too far. Let's go back about 7 years. You had good cattle prices. Highest nominal cattle prices in the history of your industry. And the entire industry, government and private alike, said, you know, you've got the longest biological cycle of any farmed animal. Takes 3 years to rebuild your liquidated herd. You're going to enjoy 3 years at least of strong cattle prices. That was in early 2015. And up until that time, the entire industry, all of the conventional organizations told you there's 2 things you need to do every time your industry faces adversity. Every time you see an inexplicable collapse in prices, there's 2 solutions. You increase demand for beef, and you increase market access abroad for your products. And if you will do those 2 things and focus exclusively on those 2 things and nothing else, you will be prosperous. You've heard that for decades. So in 2015, you have the opportunity for 3 more years of profitable prices because it takes at least 3 years to rebuild your liquidated herd. And all the analysts told you this. What happened? Exactly the opposite of what everyone said. Your prices collapsed, and they collapsed further and faster than at any time in the history of your industry. And they collapsed all through 2015, and they didn't settle at bottom until October of 2016. And what did the industry say? Well, you just need to increase beef demand, and you need to create more market access abroad, and you will be prosperous. And we looked at that, you looked at that, and said, I've got to be mindful of Dr. Thornsberry's directions. Bull, S-H apostrophe T. So we did 2 things when we saw those cattle prices collapse. You did 2 things. Called for an investigation by the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. We called for investigations by USDA, and they ignored us, so we went elsewhere. And in addition to that, we began looking for a law firm. You know, we realized the government had expressed absolute disinterest in protecting the competitiveness of your industry. So we said, the executive branch hasn't done it, Congress has refused to do it, we need to go elsewhere. So we went to the US judicial system, but we had to find a law firm first. So we did 2 things. We called for an investigation, and we began searching for a law firm. And when we called for the investigation, what did the conventional industry say? There's nothing wrong with the markets. This can all be explained by supply and demand. The only reason you're doing this is to establish relevancy for your organization. So you exhibited grit. You kept forging ahead. And we forged ahead with the investigation that began in 2016. And as that investigation unfolded, we saw, for the first time in our history, that disconnect between the retail prices of beef that consumers were paying and the price of your cattle that you were receiving, we saw them begin to move in opposite directions. We saw retail beef prices trending sharply upward. We saw your cattle prices stair-stepping downward. We've never seen this before. And so we were convinced, which is why we filed the lawsuit, alleging that the 4 largest meat packers were colluding in your marketplace in order to depress prices paid to the U.S. cattle producer at the same time inflating prices to U.S. consumers. And so then everyone began to look at the industry from a little bit of a different perspective. Because in 2018, you accomplished the record beef exports. You had the highest exports in terms of volume and in terms of value in the history of your industry in 2018. And how were you rewarded after you accomplished the high beef demand and excessive or increased exports? You were rewarded with depressed prices. Your prices in 2018 were lower than they were in 2017. The entire industry began to question whether or not this decades-old mantra of all you need to do is increase beef demand and increase exports and you will be prosperous, they began to question the validity of that we've been following for so long. And then in 2019, we did file the lawsuit, a historic antitrust lawsuit alleging the 4 packers colluded, and then there was a game changer. Soon after the lawsuit was filed, we had the fire in Holcomb, Kansas, in August of 2019, and your cattle prices collapsed further. And even though it was a fire in one plant, just one of the 4 major packers' plants had a fire, all of the packers began offering lower bids for your cattle. All of the packers began benefiting from the skyrocketing wholesale beef prices and retail beef prices. And that was a game changer. Because at that point, the organization that said there's nothing wrong with the markets in 2016, we've been monitoring those markets, everything's functioning properly, it's just a function of supply and demand. That organization came out and said we need an investigation. And then the U.S. Department of Agriculture called for an investigation. That was in August of 2019, shortly thereafter. And then members of Congress began to take notice of what was happening in your industry because they were concerned about this departure between that long historical connection between retail prices and cattle prices, because after all, the only ingredient in beef is cattle. And there should be a strong synchronous relationship between those 2 price points, and people began to take notice. And then, in March of 2020, at the outset of the COVID pandemic, for the first time in history, and the first time in my memory, and I'm sure of all of yours, for the first time, consumers went to the grocery store and could not buy the protein they needed for their families. And that opened the floodgates. That caused the President of the United States, that caused many more members of Congress, that caused state attorneys general, and that caused state agricultural directors from all across the United States, all calling for an investigation. And so for the first time in history, we had the U.S. Department of Agriculture's ongoing investigation since the Holcomb, Kansas fire. Then joining that investigation was the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Justice, and then joining that were several state attorneys general. Now that investigation is still going on today. And so we have the most intense focus on the weaknesses of our industry going on right now as we sit here today that we've ever seen in the history of our industry. Never has there been this intense focus on the broken structure of the U.S. cattle and beef markets, because now the consumers are involved. And now members of Congress are really paying attention. And we have legislation introduced, not by accident. There's a little bit of a history there. Back in 2019, we began shopping for a member of Congress willing to put in place a comprehensive reform package to do what's necessary to restore the competition that has been purged from your entire live cattle supply chain for the past 7 years. And you know who stepped to the plate to say, yeah, I'm willing to do it? A vegan, Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey. And we thought, well, who else? Well, there was nobody else. It was Cory Booker. So he said, all right, we're going to work with you. So we sat down and helped draft a comprehensive bill that included 5014 that was already in there. It included a ban on packer ownership. It included a ban or prohibition on the use of unpriced formula contracts. It included clarification that producers don't have to prove competition to the entire industry to be protected under the Packers and Stockyards Act. It was our wish list included in that bill. But Senator Cory Booker wanted to bring on support from environmentalists and other groups that are not of like mind, and they included a limitation on the size of cattle feeding operations. So we helped them draft all of the comprehensive competition issues, but he insisted upon keeping this prohibition or the restriction on the size of cattle feeding operations, and we said, you know what, would you split the bill in half? Let's split the bill in half. We will support the competition issues. You run with whatever you need to do with your feedlot restriction sizes. And he wouldn't do it. So he said, we can't endorse this. So we began shopping again, and we went back to Senator Grassley with the request for a 5014 bill. That was already in the Booker bill, already in legislation that has been introduced in Congress. And Senator Grassley says, yes, we'll run with that. And Senator John Tester, so we have a bipartisan bill. Senator Grassley, Republican from Iowa, Senator Tester, Democrat from Montana, have joined together to put forth a bill. And that bill has been sitting in Congress for quite some time, sitting in the U.S. Senate Agricultural Committee, has not been even brought up for a vote. And in the meantime, we've had 3 congressional hearings on your cattle markets. U.S. Senate Agricultural Committee, U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, and the House Subcommittee on Livestock and Foreign Agriculture. We've never seen this kind of attention on what's wrong with our industry. And so what's the meatpacking lobby doing today as we began forging ahead and pushing these issues? We've got them on the table. They haven't been addressed, but they're on the table. So what's the meatpacking lobby doing? They are scrambling to regroup in order to fight back against our efforts to reform the marketplace, because they want one thing and they want one thing only. They want this industry to continue exactly the way it is today, because they designed it to be exactly the way it is today. They designed your industry to ensure that they could do to your industry what they have already done to the poultry and hog industries, and that is to control the producers from the beginning, from birth to plate in the cattle industry and the hog industry, and from egg to plate in the poultry industry. And your industry has been in their sights for decades. They have been working in Congress on a regular basis to ensure that there are no reforms to disrupt their ability to vertically integrate and control your industry, and they don't want anything to change today. So they are enlisting economists and they are enlisting the conventional organizations to tell you, you really don't know what it will take to restore competition. 5014 isn't going to work. All you need to do is hunker down, because if you wait this out, your prices are going to be good in the future. And how many of you will be left? Folks, let's get back to the question. Do you have the opportunity today to win? And the answer is unequivocally yes, because it's been your grit and determination and support that has forced the issue to the forefront. And now the issue is there. And now we need to push the issue. We're standing at the gate. Now we need to push this through the gate. And in order to do that, we need to be laser focused. There are a lot of issues affecting your industry. We have to prioritize. What's the most serious problem and what's the cause of the problem? Most serious problem is your industry is so highly concentrated, it is vulnerable to manipulation through unlawful antitrust violations. Concentration is one of the 2 most critical problems facing your industry. The second one is globalization. Giving the packers the ability to source beef from anywhere in the world in order to displace your access to the domestic marketplace. It's the combination of that concentration and globalization, the unlimited access to imports from around the world, that have given the meat packers tremendous leverage over your industry, and we need to break that up. And so we need to administer triage to our industry. We have to focus. And the triage is, let's do what we put on the table. let's get the 5014 bill passed. Because the first thing we need to do to restore competition that has been purged from your industry is to force the competitors to compete. And the way you force the competitors to compete is you make them bid for fat cattle in the negotiated cash market. And the way to do that is with Senator Grassley's and Tester's Senate Bill 949. So first, you force the packers to again compete in the marketplace, and then we need to empower the consumers who are now looking at you as their source of the best beef in the world, produced under the best of conditions. They want to support you. We need to empower them to help you restore competition to your marketplace. We need to empower consumers when they purchase their beef at the grocery store to buy the beef for their families that is born, raised, and harvested in the United States of America. And that's your trademark. And they want to do it. After they went to the grocery stores in 2020 and could not buy the protein they needed for their family, they want to help you. And the meatpacking lobby is going to try to divide and split the consumers off from you. So we need to be laser focused. We need to be after two things right now. Senator Grassley and Tester's Senate Bill 949 and the return of mandatory country of origin labeling for beef. And once we accomplish those two, which we will, not if, once we accomplish those two, then we need to go down that comprehensive list that's still contained in the Booker bill, and we need to pull those out and introduce them as legislation too. And that includes the ban on packer ownership, the prohibition against unpriced formula contracts, and so forth. So the message is simple. Each and every one of you, when you go home, you need to call your members of Congress and say, we need you to support your colleague's bill, Senator Tester's and Senator Grassley's bill, and we need you to support mandatory country of origin labeling. So unlike today, when the meat packers and importers have unilateral authority to decide from what country they will source their cheaper, undifferentiated beef in order to displace your domestic production, the meat packers and the importers have exclusive authority to make that decisions because the consumer can't tell the difference. So we need to put the power into the hands of the consumer to help the American cattle farmer and rancher stay in business. And the way they can do that is with their purchasing decisions with a mandatory country of origin label. So there's a lot of things that are facing your industry. 30 by 30, RFID mandate. But right now, you have the opportunity to win and to begin restoring competition to your market if we stand together and if we enlist the ongoing support of the consumers. And it's in your hands. And there's no question in anybody's mind from all the people that are watching this event that you have the grit and determination to do just that. God bless everyone here.